Hi, Fountain Six. So today you are going to be diving into the next part of this activity list. We finished the Earth Science patterns on Earth in the top. So now we're moving on to graphing. So today you're going to be doing the graphing note sheet, still part of Unit 6. So please open up the graphing note sheet. It should look like this. As usual, either make a copy in Google Drive or send it to Notability. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to try and name these three types of graph. We can see A here, B here, and C here. And then when you're ready, when you've tried to name those types of graphs, please join me and we will go through those answers. So this PowerPoint is all about graphing data. And remember, data can either be quantitative with numbers or qualitative if it's an observation using one of your 5 senses. And I'm going to show you how to create graphs using an online program, both line graphs, double line graphs, and bar graphs. So we're going to first go through those graphs that you identified. This first one, what type of graph is this? If you said bar graph, you are correct. These bars show us how many people like each of these types of fruit. This next one, what type of graph is this? If you said a pie graph or a pie chart, you are correct. These slices of the pie show us the percentage or number of people whose favorite type of movie is comedy, action, romance, drama, or sci-fi. And here's our last one. What type of graph is this? If you said line graph, you are correct. This line shows us a pattern of the number of push-ups done over the course of many days. So we're first going to talk about what are graphs. And I hope we are going to fill in our note sheet. Those red words go into our note sheet just like usual. So graphs are a visual representation that help us understand data. They show us patterns. As we just saw on our line graph on the previous page, we could see the number of push-ups people did over the course of many days, and maybe over the course of a week, we could see a pattern. Here on this line graph, what is this one showing? So this one shows how many people, the number of people that are in a store at a given time. Now, looking at this, if we looked at the data separately, the number of people at 10 a.m., the number of people at 3 p.m., it might not show us a clear picture. But by putting it into a graph, you can actually see when is the time when, if you were a manager, maybe you'd want to have the most people working, and that would be 1 p.m. When is the time that maybe you'd want to have the least staff in? Maybe 10 a.m. or 6 p.m. because there aren't as many people in the store to help them. So let's first talk about line graphs. Line graphs are the most common type of graph that are used in science. They really show a trend over time. And we use line graphs or make line graphs when the independent variable is quantitative. Now remember from earlier in this year, the independent variable is what we are changing, what we are choosing to change, throughout an experiment. So when the independent variable is quantitative, that means it's something that we can count or measure in numbers. In this case, you can see we are measuring a change in temperature over the course of many days or even a week. So let's take a look at some parts of a line graph. First, we're going to look at the y-axis. So this y-axis runs vertically. That means it goes up and down. And we typically take the dependent variable from our lab and use it as the axis label. So if you remember during our Alka-Seltzer lab, our independent variable, what we were choosing to change was the temperature of the water. But our dependent variable, what we were measuring, was how quickly the Alka-Seltzer reacted, or the reaction speed. Therefore, if we were doing a graph of that experiment, then our y-axis title would be reaction speed. If our y-axis title is the dependent variable, then our x-axis is the independent variable. This one runs horizontally or side to side. So again, thinking about the Alka-Seltzer lab, since our independent variable was the temperature of the water, that's what we were choosing to change trial to trial, that's what would be our x-axis label, the temperature of the water. But these labels need units. So again, if we were thinking of our Alka-Seltzer lab, our unit for temperature would be Celsius. And our unit for reaction speed would be seconds, because that's what we were measuring it in. If we look here, this time is also measured in seconds, and height is measured in centimeters. These units are extremely important because if we take a look, right, this graph is showing us how high someone can throw a ball. If this time was measured in hours, then this might not be so impressive that they could throw it this high, but it took 2 hours to get this high. Or if this height was in kilometers, and they could throw it 2 kilometers or 2,000 kilometers in 2 seconds, they should be going to the Olympics. So these units are extremely important. So let's take a look at some labels and units. First question, it says, what is the label on the x-axis? Now remember, x is horizontal. So take a second, try and figure out what is the label. If you said it is time, then you are correct. What is our unit for this label? Our unit of time, is it years? Is it days? If you said seconds, you are correct. We are measuring time in seconds. So we know that height is our y-axis or dependent label, but what is the unit? How are we measuring height? If you said centimeters, you are correct. So some other parts of a line graph is the title, extremely important. The title tells us what it is that we're looking at on the graph. And the title has to include the independent and dependent variables. In other words, it needs to include whatever is written on the x-axis and on the y-axis. So thinking about our x-axis, which is years or time, and the y-axis, which is the number of papers published, what could we title this graph? If you said the number of papers published per year, that would be a great answer. That takes our y-axis, number of papers published, per year, which is our x-axis, getting both our dependent and independent variables in the title. So let's do another one. Here we can see our dependent y-axis is the height of plants in centimeters, and our independent x-axis is the amount of fertilizer in grams. Take a minute, think of a title, and then when you're ready, come back and let's see how yours compares to mine. So if I was going to name this, I might name it How the Amount of Fertilizer Affects the Height of Plants, right? That really makes it sound like our scientific questions. How the independent variable on my x-axis affects the dependent variable. So one of our last steps, we need to determine the appropriate scale. And this just means how are the numbers spaced? What are we counting by on each axis? Now, these numbers, I'm going to go back, right? These numbers don't have to be the same, counted the same on the x-axis as the y. The x-axis, if we look, we're counting by fives. 5 years in between. 1992 to 1997 is 5. 1997 to 2002 is 5. But they're not counting by fives on the y-axis, they're counting by 500. That's okay. What's important to notice is that they're counting evenly. 500 to 1,000 is 500. 1,000 to 1,500 is 500. 1,500 to 2,000 is 500. So whatever you're counting by, you've got to be consistent throughout the axis. I'm going to give you a second to finish copying this one down, and then we'll move on to our next slide. So another part is a key or a legend. And just like in a map, like you would see in social studies, a key or legend just shows us what the bars or lines or dots represent. And this is extremely important when we're graphing more than one set of data. So here we've got a key, right? And we can see that this graph is showing us the favorite foods of boys and girls, including, right, food types from our x-axis and people from our y-axis. So what are these purple and pink showing us? If you said it's showing us gender or boys versus girls, you are correct. The purple shows us how many boys like pizza, chocolate, and ice cream. And the pink shows us how many girls like pizza, chocolate, and ice cream, so that we can compare. So here's a little graphing checklist, and we're going to be walking through this. So you're going to decide on the type of graph, whether it's a line or bar or even a pie chart. If you were drawing it by hand, you would draw the x-axis horizontally, the y-axis vertically, making sure to leave up enough room on the page. But I'm going to show you how to do this online, so you won't need to draw the x and y axes. You do have to give each axis a label and a unit. You do need to create a title, including the independent and dependent variables. And you do need to make a maximum point for the axis. And make a key if necessary. Last thing, you're going to be typing in the data and plotting it to make a bar or line graph. Now remember, for step 6, you only need to make a key if you're graphing a double or triple line graph, a double or triple bar graph. If it's just one line, one bar, we don't need a key because we're not differentiating between different things. So let's take a look at some bar graphs before we do some practice. Now, bar graphs are similar to line graphs in many ways when it comes to their setup, but what's different is that we used line graphs to show quantitative data, numbers or measurements, and we use bar graphs to show qualitative data. So in this case, what is the bar graph showing us? The bar graph shows us a type of pet, a rabbit, dog, cat, goldfish, hamster. These are things that we observe with our eyes. We can see the rabbit, dog, cat, goldfish, hamster. But that itself is not a number. A goldfish is not a number. The number of people that own goldfish is a number, but we're looking only at the x or independent axis. And what's on the x-axis is something that we must collect using our eyes, making it qualitative. Now, the rest of the rules kind of apply. There should be a title that includes the independent and dependent, aka the x-axis and y-axis. There should be labels and units if necessary, a key if necessary. What's different though is that you'll have bars instead of a line. And you can see here that underneath each bar, it shows what is being represented by that bar. This one shows air, this one shows cork, this one shows glass. You can either do it that way, or instead, this one has 5 different colored bars. You could instead make a key, and the key would show what each bar color represents. Either way, as long as you're showing what the bars represents, that's great. Now, a pie chart that we saw from the beginning, it shows a portion or a piece of a whole, just like a piece of pie. So let's take a look. What portion or percentage of people love action movies? So if we look here, 5 people love action movies, and 5 people makes up 25% of this group. So 25% would be our answer. So we are going to be making a graph using something called Create a Graph. So I'm going to hop out of here for a second. So in your note sheet, you should be up to this. We're going to walk through these steps. And as you walk through them, I'm going to do them on my screen too so that we can see them together. These steps are going to stay right in your note sheet though. As you can see, they're right down here so that you can go back to them anytime throughout this year. So you're going to go to something called Create a Graph. If the link doesn't work, please just type in Create a Graph in Google. You're going to choose the type of graph. We've got bar, line, and pie. For this year, we're always going to use line unless told otherwise. We'll never use a pie chart. A couple times we'll use a bar graph. But notice I just clicked on line where it said design. Then, according to this, it says under the design lab, you want to make sure that you're in that line graph. And then you're going to go to the data tab, which is right here. Here is where you would enter your graph title, your x-axis label with the unit in parentheses, the y-axis label with the unit in parentheses. You can leave source blank. You definitely don't need that. You are the source, you are the creator, so you don't need anything for that. Now here is where it might change. If you're doing a single line graph, if you're only graphing one set of data, the groups would stay as one. If you're graphing two sets of data, we would make the groups two, and then you can see I've got more spots to type in my data. If your data table only has 5 lines in it, this would be great. But what if my data table has 10 lines in it? Notice one other thing, that when you make it two groups, these appear. And now these help us make a key, because notice that my lines will be different colors. This would be where I would put in my titles. Maybe green is graphing turtles and purple is graphing rabbits. I would put my titles in to help make a key. Now, your minimum and maximum value, very important. Your minimum value, look at the smallest value or y-axis on your data table. You're going to put 1 below that number. So if your smallest value is 5, we don't want 5 to be our minimum value. I would make it 4. If your largest one is 22, then your max value should be 1 larger, like 23. Then it says we're going to go to the Labels tab. And here it says everything can be left as is, so nothing to check. Then you're going to click the Preview tab. Now, I don't have anything in mine, right? So the only data I put in was a 5 and a 22, so that's what mine shows up as. If I would like to put this into something, I can either copy this image and then paste it into a lab in Notability or Google Docs, or I could take a screenshot of this and put that screenshot from my photos right into a lab. So it's time to practice. Let's do one together. So we're going to use the directions that we just went through, and we're going to be putting in this data table. So I'm going to go back to design. I'm going to make sure I'm on a line graph. I am. Now, first what I'm going to see is I'm going to determine which is X and which is Y. And here's how it really usually goes. The first one in your data table is an X, is the X axis. The second one is your Y axis. And if we think about that, that makes sense, right? Let's put it into our what depends on what format. Height depends on age. Therefore, height is the dependent variable and should go on the y-axis. So now I'm going to look back at my create a graph. So I know that my x-axis label was age, but I need to bring the unit with it, which is years. I know that my y-axis label is height. And again, I'm going to bring the unit with it in parentheses, which is centimeters. I'm going to skip the title for now. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Now, if I look here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items. So this is going to say 5. And this is one set of data. So this is going to say 1. Now, the last thing I need to do is type in these numbers exactly as they look here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is on my left, and it's going to stay right on my left. 1, oops, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see on my left and on my left. These on my right are going to go right here on the right. So I've got 76, 89, 95, 102, and 110. Now let's update our minimum and maximum values. Let's see. Our smallest value, remember this says minimum value, so we're not thinking about these, only these. My smallest number is 76. So as I mentioned before, let's put our minimum value as 75. Our biggest is 110. So just to keep it nice and even, I'm going to say 115. Larger than 110, but it keeps it counting by 5s. I'm going to do a quick preview. Wow, that looks nice. Here I've got my x-axis label and unit, my y-axis label and unit. I do need a title though, and that's where you come in. I want you to make a graph title. Remember that it must include both the axis labels And then when you're done and ready, click on preview. Either take a screenshot of your graph or copy it, as I showed you before, copy image. And then I want you to paste it right in your note sheet. We will be using this notes for many other activities, not only throughout this unit, but throughout the rest of the year. So please make sure that this note sheet is completed. If you need to rewatch anything, take the time and go back. Okay? If you have any questions, then I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye, guys.